Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on integrating the AxIT system for strength assessment and progress tracking. So today we are joined by Ryan Gordon, Clinic Director and Strength and Conditioning Lead at M20 Health based in Manchester. A quick introduction to PhysEquip. We supply medical technologies in the MSK rehab space, supporting clinicians and businesses, providing education and business solutions. So today's session is focused on the AxIT system technology, which is a all-in-one system for measuring performance, prevention, or rehab, which consists of force plates and dynamometry tools. So Ryan will be sharing his experience of integrating the system into his physio clinic. So if you're considering investing in tech, then it's a very, very valuable opportunity to hear insights from other clinicians. So looking forward to it. Following Ryan's presentation, we will do a short Q&A covering some pre-submitted questions that we've received. If you are listening live, please feel free to submit some questions into the Q&A tab and we can also address those. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Ryan for his presentation.
Thanks, Katie. As Katie said, I am a sport rehabilitator. I graduated from the University of Salford in 2016 and did my master's in 2018 strength and conditioning. Been integrating the Strength by Numbers kit into the clinic over the last 6 to 8 months now. And I'm going to talk you through how we've integrated that and the benefits of using the technology. But first, before we do that, we need to kind of understand what the key component to effective rehabilitation is. And I was on a course probably back into last year now with Andrew McCauley, absolutely fantastic course, just unraveling strength and conditioning for therapists, and made us really think about kind of what it is we want to get across to our patients. And the kind of main word that came out from the session there was communication. How effective is our communication to make sure that we're getting the best understanding from what we're trying to talk about to our patients, and they understand how to utilize what we're trying to engage in and work on within those sessions. With the assessments and that we deliver from our subjective objective assessments, and then also going through to our onboarding of the rehab plans or even performance plans, we're looking at our patients' ability and willingness to move, the average force across multiple repetitions, maybe looking at limb versus limb, and agonist versus antagonist, and also comparing all of that to normative data as well to make sure that we're training our athletes or those individuals effectively. So the equipment itself comprises of 2 force plates, a handheld dynamometer, and a strain gauge. Now, when we're looking at the force plates, really versatile when we are able to assess movements such as squats, lunges, walking, running assessments, jumping, hopping, lifting, push-ups, and muscle strength tests. And then we have the handheld dynamometer or the strain gauge, looking at a bit more isometric based assessments or isolating muscle groups, and ability to apply force through range, particularly through the strain gauge if we're attaching that to a pulley system. The versatility to be able to utilize a handheld dynamometer of patients that may not be as strong or as willing, or ability to be able to produce force, so that you know that you're in control. But if you might have somebody who's a little bit more powerful, maybe you're assessing a runner or an athlete and they're fairly strong, you may want to then use the strain gauge to incorporate that isometric activity where it's in a fixed position and they're unable to move, and the results aren't being compromised by the clinician over applying force onto that as well. In terms of how we can start using the technology, honestly, I started using this just through all my subjective and objective assessments. So through those subjective and objective assessments, we're trying to establish the causative factors of what's causing that someone's pain. So with this person here, they were a CrossFit enthusiast, should we say, and recently over the last 2-3 months had some shoulder pain, left shoulder. And by going through all my assessments, I then found that a few tests were positive. So we actually, although it says shoulder flexion, we actually did an empty can test. So you can actually adapt some of these tests and make them into your own. But yeah, we did an empty can test to just further explore what was going on in the shoulder. It felt a little bit weak, but I wasn't 100% sure and to justify what we needed to do next. So the ability to explore this a little bit further was really, really interesting. So by doing that, an empty can test, the test on the left-hand side here, we looked at that peak force and rate of force development. We can see there's a clear difference between the left and right-hand side in terms of rate of force by 24%, but only a 4% difference between that peak force. Now, during the session, we integrated some shockwave therapy on the left and right shoulder because both were feeling fairly tight. And then retested at the end of the session after a few other bits of testing as well. And we can see that we've reduced that asymmetry to 0% and actually increased power on both left and right hand side. And we've also increased that power and actually that rate of force development is a lot stronger now on this left-hand side compared to the right. There wasn't necessarily an injury, but there was maybe something affecting that person's neuromuscular control and an ability to produce that force. So in the graphs at the top here, we're looking at the rate of force development, which is this quick spike in force here. And then how can they sustain it for a certain period of time, usually between 3 and 5 seconds. And then the tests are an average of all 3 repetitions. We can then also utilize this as a functional assessment. So the person here was doing some lunge-based tests, and I noticed that right and left-hand sides, although his left side was injured, I wanted to establish what the difference was between the right and left. Now you can see on the graph on both on the green and the blue, we're picking up this slight anomaly here when we get into that landing position. I'm not sure if you saw it on the first video, so we're just going to slow it down a little bit more. By eye, it was very difficult to see initially, but we do actually go into a slight valgus position on that landing. So if we hold that there, initial point of contact, and then the knee diverts across into that valgus position, and then comes back into that stability position there. So we can pick that up really clearly within the AxIT system and understand how best to move forward with that and whether or not they're able to produce and absorb force effectively. So understanding their movement control and movement patterns allows us maybe not necessarily to focus on force or power. We actually may need to do some stability-based work, particularly around the hip and the knee. We can also establish some ratios between those agonist and antagonist muscles. So hamstrings and quadriceps, typically the higher ratio indicates relatively stronger hamstrings, while a lower ratio suggests greater quadriceps dominance. And then also looking at shoulder internal and external rotation, a balance ratio particularly supports optimal shoulder function and reduces the risk of shoulder-related injuries. So it's nice to get that in-depth analysis, not necessarily between right and left limb, but also within the limb and between different muscle groups. As well as that, we can also establish some balance-based testing. There's some great work. I think Dr. Clemenceau and Andrew Macaulay have spoken about this fairly recently, particularly in Andrew's recent webinar with yourselves. But looking at that balance, particularly in the older population, and that risk and falls prevention, how important that is. We can also establish different testing parameters within this as well. So we looked at a single leg squat performance over a 30-second period for one of our tennis players. Looking at total excursion of the foot into the anterior, posterior, medial, and lateral position, and how much they were able to, well, whether they reduced their total excursion between right and left hand side, and that velocity of movement. Ideally, we want that as small as possible so that they're fairly balanced and well controlled. And you can see this finished study on the right-hand side here looked at a balance and center of pressure results of people at different genders and age groups, establishing normative data that you can also compare that then to your clients. In terms of some functional testing, really important when we're trying to look at developing muscle strength, power as well, particularly through the counter movement jump and the 10 to 5 repeated hop. So we've got a bilateral base movement here with a counter movement jump, looking at right and left side, ability to quickly or slowly absorb force and then produce force. So counter movement jump is considered as a slow strength stretch shortening cycle movement that involves both eccentric and concentric muscle actions and well associated with that sprint performance and strength. Whereas we have the continuous jumps on the right hand side, such as the repeated hop, considering faster strength stretch shortening cycle movements that provide more information on the athlete's ability to utilize that elastic energy. And this is some of the bit more in-depth analysis that we can get with through the AxIT system and try and break that down a little bit further, and gives us a bit of an indication of what we can do next to benefit that athlete or that patient that we're working with, as well as doing these assessments on a one-to-one session, whether it's just an injury or a performance session. It's key to get some baseline measurements. We had a junior tennis player struggling with his elbow over the last couple of months now, and we actually took some baseline measurements back in March before this injury came about. He was playing a little bit of tennis, but then had to have a bit of downtime due to exams. And then all of a sudden there was a huge spike in terms of that, how much that individual was playing. They were changing their serve action. So the fact that we had that baseline measurement initially was key, so that we knew where we had to get them back to and then beyond to make them a little bit stronger. So we can see one of those first measurements here, fairly equal between left and right hand side. They are a left arm player, so they're likely to be a little bit more favoured towards that left hand side, a little bit stronger there. And then over the course of the 6 tests that we did, you can see that dip in form and our ability to then change our assessment type and what to do in terms of their strength training plan, focusing on that stability training, and then starting to increase and incorporate that strength and power to utilize and potentially change his service action, which was subsequently what we did to help generate that power overall. And you can see that we've now got him up to a certain range where he's strong enough to withstand those actions, able to serve now at 100%, which is absolutely fantastic, and getting back on the tennis circuit. This is a bit of a collaborative kind of testing environment, which we're doing some baseline measurements, this time with a squash player. So how we can integrate that into an hour and a half session to generate those baseline measurements and then go through some reports. We have some reports just at the end, so I can go through those with you shortly. But usually we pick maybe a selection of 10 to 15 tests, some areas which we want to try and work on and improve over maybe 4 or 5 weeks, just to see if we can get some development, whether it's neuromuscular control or any differences between left and right side peak force or rate of force development. And then we can look at establishing other protocols. Maybe it's their agility or it's their endurance performance that we want to establish. What's also really important, and something that we have a bit more of a passion for in our clinic, is developing those younger athletes and working with those younger athletes. And we can see those impacts of particularly Severs and Osgood's at those younger ages, where maybe we've got some early maturing adolescents or late maturers picking up certain injuries. And as they get to those under 12, under 13, under 14, some of them are actually now going into academy football, where they may have been playing once or twice a week, and all of a sudden they're going up to 4, 5, 6 sessions and maybe up to 2 matches per week. So the changes of load on those individuals has completely changed from where they were maybe a couple of months or a year before. And it will also have an impact depending on at what stage they're going through that maturation phase. So we can see at the top, round under 10s, under 9s, under 10s, they're susceptible to more of those severe disease conditions. And then as we start to come into the under 11s to under 14s, more likely to be bringing on that Osgood-Schlatters, and that kind of indicates when we're actually seeing some of those junior athletes going into the academy settings. And we can see that everyone, or juniors, will actually go through their growth spurts at different stages. So of 29 subjects here, we looked at 11, not we, sorry, the study looked at 11 which were average developers, and then 9 which were late developers, and 9 which were early. So we can never be too sure as when they're going to come on during their maturation phases. And you'll usually see those early maturing males physically larger from about the ages of 8 years old, entering puberty younger than 10, or between 10 and 11 years old. And then that growth during puberty is largely in the torso, classic mesomorph body frame, adaptive motivational profile, a bit more higher self-esteem and greater perception of competence, whereas those later maturing males may enter puberty later than 12, 13 years old, have smaller pubertal gains in terms of height, weight, BMI, and absolute relative mass and muscle mass, and taller and more linear as adults. So there are certainly risk factors that we need to try and establish, and that we can establish with the testing equipment. We actually had a swimmer very recently who's complaining of left knee pain. So we went through an assessment, just 3 tests: hip abduction, knee flexion, knee extension. And you can see quite clearly that there's a slight dominance on one side, but not too much of a difference in hip abduction and knee flexion, particularly on that peak force and rate of force development. But when we then looked at his knee extension, there's a huge difference in peak force and rate of force development. And you can see that on the graphs on the left-hand side here as well. So 28% difference in peak force and 51% difference in terms of that rate of force development. So that's a clear indication of that oncoming Oscar Slatter's indication, and how we then need to protect that individual in terms of their training going forward, and what we need to do with their strength training and performance plan. More recently, actually just last week, we went and did some athlete profiling, looking at peak force and RFD across numerous different tests. So this was just one session that we did to try and generate a player profile. So here we have a few tests of hip abduction, knee extension, knee flexion. So a few in the lower limb, a few in the upper limb, and then a few more functional based tests as well. Now, if we look at it, this is something I've put together, and you can generate your own, but extracting some of the data from the Strength by Numbers kit. But we can see the differences between left and right hand side. Those in the green are under 10%. Then those in the orange are between 10 and 20%, and those above in the red, above 20% there. If we also look at the body weight percentages and the recommended body weight percentage, even though here the knee extension was a difference of 2, when we're comparing it to the research where they should be for their body weight, we can actually see that they're well off in terms of where they should be, that recommendation. So 38, 39% compared to that 60 to 74. Now, the system itself will give you an indication or provide you some normative data as to what its recommendations are. Obviously, depending on the sport that you're working with, you may want to look into that a little bit further to make sure that we're working the right parameters. But it gives you a nice understanding of where those normative values are. We also assessed some of the power output as well, rate of force development, and we can see, based on although there were a lot more green on the peak power, we can see that rate of force development needs a little bit more work. Now, this isn't necessarily just something to focus on in terms of strength, but it may be more of a neuromuscular control. There may be some tightness in certain areas which are affecting that power output, and that's that peak performance. So this just is one piece of the jigsaw. It's not a if they're weak here, we need to work on their strength. We actually need to work on establishing a few different protocols to make sure that we're building up that athlete as resilient as possible. We can also then look at how we can integrate this into the clinic itself and the benefits of investing. So if you're creating better, happier patients, they're likely to lead to more referrals, which is great because we can see someone a lot quicker, a lot more effectively, and hopefully we're not taking 6, 7, 8 sessions to establish the causative factors and going through their strength plans. Also allows that individual to be a bit more adherent to their strength training, because we know, well, they know that they're going to get tested the next time they come in 3, 4 weeks time. depending on how long you leave it. We can do a lot more frequently if need be, but for those major changes, will probably take about 4 to 6 weeks. And if they know they're going to get tested, then they may be a bit more adherent to doing those exercises. And then we may be able to provide them a few more of those exercises as well if they're investing into their health. And if we show them that normative data and where they should be, particularly if they're working towards activities of daily living or just general sport performance, then that makes a better outcome measures for both the patient and the practitioner. You're then able to offer a wider or a more extensive range of services in-house and externally. So you may be able to maximize that growth by speaking to kind of local gyms, local sports teams, and collaborating with other healthcare professionals on how to improve performance across your network, as it were, not just within those who are just coming into clinic with specific injuries. This is something that the Strength by Numbers or AxIT team are putting together. I'm not sure it's available just yet in the UK, but I'm sure it will be soon. And it's just a very detailed report and an outcome of that person's assessment. And it's a lot easier to read and understand. We don't have necessarily the time in our clinical environment to go through lots of in-depth data and try and extract that information and make it meaningful to and how we want to interpret. So the fact that it's so easy to understand, not for necessarily a clinician, but also the patient, I think that creates a much more collaborative environment and how we can proceed forward to creating a more better structure within our clinical assessments. And that's me done.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ryan. That was really useful information. So we're going to start off with some pre-submitted questions, which some you've covered definitely in the slides there, but we go into some more detail if possible. And yeah, if you are on live, then please still feel free to pop any questions in the Q&A tab. So firstly, yeah, you did cover this quite a lot on one of the sections within the slides, Ryan, but we did have a question about what you suggest to do with younger populations under 13. So from your point of view, so do you look at the testing differently for these patients? And you explained sort of some of the reasons and the risk factors that come with these particular patient groups. Why do you think it is very important for using more accurate testing for adolescent patients, would you think?
Yeah, and I think particularly within the elite sport environments or academy level environments, need to be testing these guys on a more regular basis because you don't know. You can have a slight prediction of when those growth rates are going to occur, but if we are able to establish it will minimize that potential injury risk, particularly when they do go through those shorter growth spurts and they're already losing that slight power because they've increased in the skeletal mass, but not necessarily muscle mass. Then, yeah, if we're keeping a constant review of each of those individuals, then we're able to understand or maybe draw back some of their training and make sure that they don't experience some of these injuries and unnecessarily, in my opinion. But providing that we have good collaboration between the S&C coach, the performance coach, and the physio department or rehab department, I think it's more of a structure rather than just keeping it in-house within the clinic or the physio sport rehab team.
Yeah, no, perfect. Great. So the next question is about how have you gone about educating your clients on the benefits of the system?
Honestly, just utilizing the equipment within every day-to-day sessions. You don't need to be too extensive with some of the tests. As I said, one of them I only did one through the positive tests that we established during the assessments. You can go into a little bit more depth if you wish to do so, but I would just start getting to use these devices, even if you have a handheld dynamometer in your practice, or you want to utilize one, go and buy one. I started with an active force, quickly found the limitations with it, but it was still giving me some feedback, and it's one of the reasons why we ended up going with strength by numbers. But yeah, I think as you start using the equipment, then you can quickly see how useful that information can be, and then showing the patient, you get a lot more engagement rather than it being your word against their word.
So what's been the overall feedback from sort of patients? You know, obviously it's a very visual tool as well, isn't it? They're able to see these reports in front of them within the session as well. So how's that been for your patients?
Yeah, typically I'll go through a few of these the tests directly with them after we've done it. And straight away they've got great engagement and want to see or want to understand how to improve that as well. So if they are able to understand, or we communicate that information across them effectively, then they're able to kind of get on board with their rehab program or their performance program. And we're not just keeping that data to ourselves. I think if we share that information with the patient as well, you get a better integration with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely a lot more awareness now, isn't there, with patients coming through the door, isn't it? It's that sort of
Patients
expectation.
patients love data, and
Yes.
they're all, if they're able to read and find Dr. Google or what condition they have, then they'll also start looking at research papers. I've got numerous patients that are coming to me with research papers on conditions that they have, and sending them via email before we've even had them in clinic. So I think we need to get ahead of the game and be a bit more efficient in terms of how we're programming and how we're assessing within our clinical environment.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I think things are moving very quickly, aren't they, in this area, like the standard of care and expectations. And I think, you know, these tools essentially are going to be, yeah, an essential part, aren't they, of clinical practice, really, sort of, like, say, with that accessibility of people being able to read and search out data sort of quite easily now. So, yeah, there's definitely an element of that.
And with the
Um,
testing as well, everybody's different. So you're not going to produce the same results from one individual to the next. So everyone's going to have slightly different asymmetries between left and right, depending on the sports that they play or the activities that they do. So by integrating this individual to individual, I think you then create a tailored approach for that individual rather than, right, here's 3 sets of 10 of doing a resistance band exercise. I think gone are those days. We need to actually look at what forces people are able to produce, look at a little bit more in depth, maybe with that functional assessment, and then we can understand how those movement patterns are, and a better screening approach rather than just doing that general objective assessment and engaging by guessing.
yeah, absolutely. So we just had a question come through live. How easy is it to implement from a time perspective?
Very easy. The setup it takes, or the onboarding for each patient takes probably 30 seconds to a minute. We just need some general information data: the first name, surname, email address, and then their height and weight, so that we can compare some of that data within the session. And then Euro weight, the setting up of each of the devices is really quick and easy to use. You can select your tests either as your own edit, so you can select one or two tests, or that within the system itself they have quick assessments for maybe the hip, knee, the ankle, shoulder, elbow, wrist, or they might have some more specific and in-depth ones for maybe golf, running, rugby, cricket. The list goes on. So, and you can make up your own depending on some of the, maybe the research papers that you're reading, or the information that you're trying to gather, or the sport specific kind of environments. You want to collaborate some of your own tests, but you're putting those tests together probably, again, less than a minute, as long as you
Yeah.
know the ones that you're trying to find. And the onboarding from the AxIT system's absolutely brilliant. So when you are signing up to it, they have a complete backlog of how to go through each and every test, making sure that you're doing that efficiently. The last thing you want to do is just trying to do a test and not understanding the data that we're trying to extract from each of those tests. So they'll walk you through that whole testing parameter. Also can help you reading or interpreting some of that data as well, and how best to move forward with that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, like I say, timing is definitely a constraint, isn't it, within, sort of definitely in private practice as well as any other sort of sectors. But yeah, when something's there, giving you accurate sort of information at a quick speed like that within seconds, then yeah, that's a great way, in fact,
The
with the
longest approach,
patients.
the longest approach is probably the onboarding if we're not too familiar with how to produce some of the tests, but
Yeah,
it's more getting familiar and just starting to get using it, whether it's within the clinic environment between the members of staff and then getting comfortable with the data and ensuring that continuity and reliability, validity of those tests is set up. And then the onboarding itself, we can use it as a CPD tool to make sure you're going through all those effectively and understanding on how to use the assessments.
yeah, no, absolutely. Perfect. So just a couple more of the pre-submitted questions go through. So was there any practical considerations or challenges at all for implementing the AxIT into the clinic?
No, not particularly. You just need to make sure that there's you have plenty of space, particularly if you're doing jump-based tests. We have a squat rack within in our clinic, so we know that when we're doing certain tests and movements, that particularly with the strain gauge, it's in a fixed position. We know it's secure. Regardless of the individual that we're working with, we know we can get the best outcome measures from utilizing that. So from a broader perspective, making sure we have the right equipment within the clinic to be able to utilize the equipment itself. But yeah, space and probably somewhere secure to fixate some of the devices. But other than that, no.
Yeah, perfect. And then just touching on sort of what you briefly mentioned about sort of, I guess like the training pathway or making sure that, sort of clinicians are able to interpret data as well. So what was your experience in sort of your own journey of getting to a point of sort of interest in S&C, or did you have to do any further learning? Do you feel that's required, or what would you say about that?
So I did my master's in strength and conditioning, but in all honesty, the equipment and the onboarding process will help anybody go through on how to understand and interpret a lot of that information. Yes, the masters has helped, but it's not a significant tool in which you need in your armory to be able to utilize the equipment. A good understanding of strength and conditioning in general. But if you're familiar with your movement screening and you're going through day-to-day objective assessments, then this is pretty much bread and butter as long as you understand what we're trying to extract from doing those tests.
Yeah, the feedback's been that it's a very intuitive system, isn't it? So, any healthcare professional who is essentially measuring whether that is a performance or prevention, rehab space, then like I say, you're able to sort of like set this up and sort of, yeah, I guess the more that you just use it, it's what you're doing already, isn't it? Manually with testing, just incorporating that into tools and you're getting more of a sort of, yeah, reliable outcome from it. So, yeah. Now that's useful to know from your point of view. And then just sort of, yeah, one of the last ones, how can the AxIT system accommodate different types of patients? So we've mentioned quite a lot of maybe sport-orientated patients, maybe athletes, but what about the non-athlete population? Have you had much experience of those coming through the door and using the tools on those patients?
Yeah, we've had a few in terms of maybe a knee replacement or someone with um, os osteoarthritis, or just trying to establish kind of their strength abilities within hip, knee, and ankle, particularly someone with OA or let's say they're post-surgical as well. So we can then look at how to progress some of their rehab and be a bit more informed based on the testing that we're doing. Instead, it's very similar in terms of a sporting context, but we might just be we'll tailor it back a little bit. And in, to be honest, it's not too much different when working with an athlete working towards their end goal of wanting to improve their performance. Those who are coming out of post-surgical or are struggling with arthritis, anything like that, or falls prevention, we know what the end goal is. It's just how we can get to that end goal and working in smaller increments to be able to get there. And as long as we're getting that patient on board as well, and just getting their understanding as to where they're at, and then working specifically with the equipment to establish a better protocol, and a better learning environment for that individual.
Yeah, and I guess with this, some particular patient groups, with especially if it is sort of post surgery or like an older population coming back from injury, there's a lot of apprehension, isn't there, potentially around sort of the rehab program or getting back to movement, that strength side, and I think what this will allow them patients to see is giving them confidence that look like, you are progressing, you're getting better, you are strong, and you can do X, Y, and Z. And, I think that is huge, isn't it? Especially with certain populations where, their own apprehension or worry of sort of their own rehab can be a big barrier for us clinicians really to get them to the place that we can see them going.
Absolutely. I've got a stroke patient actually I was working with on Monday, and I just wanted to look at their squat a little bit more in depth, and they were showing 50% more force on the left to the right leg. Got a bit of a drop foot on the right side, but just some subtle changes. We actually reduced that down to just 4%. So just from showing that person within a couple of minutes, and maybe how we can change and adapt, and then retesting and then showing the difference and why changing or adapting is a good thing, and not just getting comfortable with what they're used to, even though it might be causing them some discomfort, or that's what they're comfortable with. If we can show them why it's important, why it's useful, and how we can proceed with that, then I think that helps massively in terms of their encouragement going forward, and an understanding of what they're doing and what their body's capable of.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, and then where does the AxIT system integrate with other technologies? You mentioned sort of integrating it with sort of your shockwave treatments. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, going through a test retest, I think is really important. Just not necessarily for the patient, more for the clinician to see if some of your treatment is working. Is it working in the right direction? Even if we're going through maybe some strength a performance session, we want to make sure maybe on a weekly basis, if we've got that ability to do so, are they still coping well with the weights or the frequency that we're providing them? Is there something else externally which is having an effect on their performance? Maybe it's their sleep, maybe it's their nutrition. So if we're doing some screening or some jumps before, maybe they're going to a performance, maybe it's a golfer or tennis player, if we can pick up on these little discrepancies and maybe suggest, actually you're down from where your baseline measurement was, we need to maybe draw you back from going into that next tournament because there's a potential injury risk, or actually their performance is going really well and we're happy for them to enter into another tournament, or we're happy for them to go, instead of sideways upstairs, we're happy for them to try going upstairs in a straight line. How we can just utilize this with other technologies, I think is really, really important. We haven't used it with the diagnostic ultrasound, but I think that would just collaborating both of those, or even the shockwave alongside that, I think would be really unique, just to get a full picture of what's going on and get a better understanding for the patient and the clinician.
Yeah, like I said there, it's that full picture, isn't it? And something like this will help determine whether, some of the manual therapies or other technologies that are using, whether that's for tissue healing or whatever it may be, then is that right for the patient? Have they responded well to that that sort of treatment and so on. And it enables you to adapt, isn't it, in all different areas as well as, yeah, they may not sort of be the right avenue that, we can throw some of our manual tools at, but otherwise it's giving you that sort of feedback, isn't it, on all of that, what you're putting into the patient away
And
from sort
if
of.
something isn't working, then you can you go through your retest again, and maybe you're trying something else instead of you're sometimes you're just waiting for the patient to tell you
Yeah,
whether they're
that's it.
feeling okay during an assessment or during treatment or during their exercises. And sometimes they will lie because they don't know what feedback to give you, or not necessarily lie, but they'll come up with, I feel absolutely fine, even though they're distributing more weights or 20%
Mm.
more weight on their right side compared to the left side during a squat. They've no idea how that is naturally meant to feel. So if we
Yeah.
can use the technologies to kind of understand that and integrate that into some of our training, and then when we come back to retesting, if that's not working, then we need to maybe adapt our training skills a little bit differently.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, great. Well, we've gone through all those bits of questions and yeah, we've answered some of the live questions come through as well. So that'll end the webinar there. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Ryan, for presenting, providing some great insight there, definitely on how, like I say, you're successfully integrating the technology. It's been great to yeah, find out some more information on that. So following this, everyone will receive a link to the webinar recording for those who couldn't make it live. And yeah, please feel free to reach out, get in touch with us if you have any further questions or want to speak to us a little bit more in depth about the AxIT system, then please do, and we can have a little chat. So thanks again, Ryan. And yes, I hope everyone has a good rest of the day.